So, after an
It seems the sound is very slow, very low, the sound.
is this better now?
Uh, uh, Better than than before, but still a bit low.
Okay. How's it now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's okay now.
okay. Good. So, we were just talking before about consciousness. Most specifically, the two kinds of consciousness, one that's the seeing of the object, and the other one is an internal seeing, or the way that the mind works. Now, I'll talk to you a lot about that later, but today what we're going to work with is this concept that consciousness is dependently arisen. Everything, in fact, is dependently arisen. That's what it means by cause and effect relationship. Everything. So consciousness arises dependently. But the Hindu view of consciousness is that it arose magically and continues sort of magically, without understanding that basically you can either be conscious of one thing or be conscious of another. An example would be try to read something on the internet while you're also listening to someone talk, like in a video on the internet. And what you'll find is that you're moving back and forth between the two, but you cannot remain fully conscious with both of them because consciousness doesn't kind of work like that. It kind of works, you either got this one or you got that one. There may be a bit of an overlap, but not much. It may, in fact, be a kind of a timing so that you can quickly move back and forth between the two. Um, but that takes a kind of a skill or a training. And that if we're capable of doing that, that allows us to really be here now because this is sensual stuff where most people think about it intellectually or they're in the inside the mind doing that kind of processing to where we're going to kind of bring the mind out of its own world into the actual real world as best we can and start living our lives in this perpetual present moment to where you can see with religions we get off into very, very deep past who was I, what was I, and what will I be in the future, and all of that kind of stuff. And this is not wise attention, and it also strengthens our ignorance and our belief about who we are. To where with the investigation that we're doing with the Buddha, we begin to recognize exactly who we are because now we're beginning to pay attention and see it for what it actually is, rather than trying to bring on a magical story that we've heard and try to fit that onto the reality of who I am now, because that's what most people do. And so we're going to start looking at it from the backwards point. So, what I would like to talk to you now about is verification for knowledge, because without good verification, then our knowledge is not strong and it has doubt in it. So, in fact, we're working with, and I'll let you know, we're talking about now the first three fetters. The first one is the personality view that I am versus no, I'm not. I'm a process. I'm just human, and that's all. Not a god. The second one is how our system is structured And when I talk about system, I'm talking about the rights, rules, regulations, religious ideas, ceremonies, what the government tells us to do, all of that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the thing that I would like to introduce to you now is the quality of doubt. So that big issue that I was just kind of glossing over in the Pali is called a silabata paramasa, and it means attachments to rites, rules, regulations, rituals, in the sense of trying to figure out how you and I are trying to get along with this society that humanity has built. Because look how many different rules there are now. Tens of thousands of different rules, from how you hold something, how you address people, how you eat your food, how you drive your car. Everything is orderly now. And yet still, even with all this orderliness, there's still a huge amount of human suffering. So the orderliness itself doesn't eliminate suffering. Not completely. Maybe a little bit. But technology, an example, the first technology was taking a rock and beating a bone so that we could get the marrow out of it. But that was our first tool, or something like that. Next thing we did was he tied a stick with some vines to that rock, and now we have some sort of primitive axe. All right? And now fast forward, and now we've got cell phones. And the difference between that stone or that axe and that cell phone hasn't eliminated any suffering at all. We still suffer. So our technology has not done us a whole lot of good. And you can put technology in that world of rights, rules, regulations, rituals, all of that supposed to stuff. Many places they even says that it comes from the god. In China they say, oh no, not anymore. It doesn't come from a god. Now it comes from the ruler. It comes from the government. But in any case, somebody's made the rules and now we got to live by them. But the third one is the issue of doubt. And so that's what we'd like to address now. So the thing that's really interesting is that modern science has really filled in a lot of the gaps in knowledge that people used to give to religion, magic, and gods. But now we know, for instance, about gravity. And boy, does that answer a lot of questions. And we understand about the time, space, and physics. We understand about particle physics, even down to string theory. And that gives us a deeper understanding than this idea that there's a soul. Because if there is a soul, there's what? 7 billion people on the planet Earth, and with Hindus, they're going to add the worms and the birds and the bees and all of that, because we might be some of that, and we might need, in fact, somehow to record some 20-digit number for identification purposes, so that the big comma machine will know who you are. So that when you do a good thing, they say, okay, that's number blah, 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 and that's you, so I'm going to record that. And then when you die, we'll say, okay, here's all what you've been doing, and let's figure this out. There's no computers like that. But yet somehow in the magical belief systems, that there is some sort of God or some sort of comma machine that's going to keep track of things for centuries. But the Buddha figured out 2,500 years ago something that modern physics is just now figuring out, and that's this issue of the cause-effect relationship, that real karma is based upon cause-effect, and it happens really quickly. And so physical reality, all we need to do is to have a little bit of math and a little bit of physics, and we recognize the whole idea of a soul being reborn, being managed by a god or a karma machine, and then have all of your your deeds tracked, so to make sure that there's some sort of divine justice happen, is all predicated on one little phrase, which you probably heard before, and that is the phrase that goes like this: good deeds or good action gives good results, and bad action gives bad results. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yeah, I think it's a deep belief for Chinese. I think that's one of the influence brought by Buddhism.
Right, but it might have been brought by Buddhism, but it's only half or a quarter of the story, and it's not a teaching of the Buddha. This is the Hinduism that Kama brought, and the Buddha actually taught against that in the following way. Because if that teaching of good action gives good results and bad action gives bad results, then ignorant people will say two things. One, they'll say, this must be true for all time, and therefore there's got to be some sort of mechanism that keeps track of it for all time. In other words, if I do something good, I will eventually get some payoff for my good action. All right? That's not the case. And the Buddha recognized that. He said that the law of karma, of good action giving good results and bad action giving bad results, is really the law of Ittiyapapajayata, is actually the law of cause and effect, and that's very immediate. It doesn't happen over the centuries. Furthermore, just to rub it in now, the Buddha also says there is a third kind of karma. The third kind of karma is mixed karma, where you have mixed good and bad motives that give mixed results. Now, we know about that. The military knows about that. They call it collateral damage, unintended consequences. I want this, so I do that, and this happens. All right? And the Buddha recognized that, and he says, oh no, not all actions that you label as good is going to give a good result. That in fact, what makes an action good may not be 100% voting. That one guy says what you did is good and another guy says it's bad. Now what are we going to do with the karma machine? And so that's why, in fact, we wind up saying very rarely is there ever any good action that is truly good. And very rarely is there an action that's bad that's fully bad. Most actions, like over 99%, are mixed, with mixed motives giving mixed results. And one of the things that we mix in there is ignorance. Another thing we mix in there is feelings, liking and not liking, wanting it to be this way and not wanting it to be that way. So, the law of karma now has been disproven by the Buddha by introducing this third kind, but wait, he's not finished yet. He's got a fourth kind of karma that's really going to seal the deal. And that's the kind of action that is neither bright nor dark. And it leads to results that are neither bright nor dark. But the kicker is, but it does lead to the end of action. Karma that ends karma. If we say the fourth kind of karma that is neither bright nor dark, that leads to results that are neither bright nor dark, then that very much fits in with the quality of the end of action, is like beginning to accept things the way they are, because in this regard, action normally means problem solving. I found a job to do. Let me do this job, and if I do it good, I'll get good results, and if I do it badly, I'll get bad results. Right? That's the whole idea, that if you understand the nature of action well, then you stop doing a lot of stuff. So let's examine this kind of action that is not dark, not bad action. Well, if we're following the path of the Buddha of suffering and no suffering, then we become dedicated to no suffering. If we're not causing suffering, then the actions are not bad. But wait a minute, what about good actions? Okay, well, mostly people think about good actions in the sense of karma is like merit building, like building a temple or doing some good, practicing some generosity in order to get some benefit later on. In Thai language, they call it tam bun. Okay, another word for it is sai bat. Now, the word bat is the same as the bowl or the pot, and sai means to put into it. In Lao language, they say tak bat, to drop into the bowl. But it's all about merit making. In other words, I do good to get some good result. If I live my life like that, then I'm going to wind up being disappointed often, because who knows if my action was good or not, who's going to give me the result that I was looking for. That maybe if I do my actions right now for the immediate benefit of right now, then I'll get the good results that I'm looking for, rather than saying, well, I'm going to do something good and hope for some future actions later, because that's going to ripen in attachment. And so this quality of karma that has both no good action and no bad action, or let us say, that ends in no results that are good or bad. And that leaves us in peace. And so this is the real teaching of the Buddha. But the Buddhist religion will stay with good results give good action and bad results give bad action, and they kind of stop there. They don't give the whole story. Why? Because they want to keep that belief system going that I will be reborn in the future, that death does not mean death. Well, right in the beginning, we have to start dealing with the idea of death, because if I'm not going to be reborn, that means I really am going to die. People don't like that idea, that we're actually temporary. Everything is temporary, including me, that I'm not going to last. But that gives us the quality then of, well, if I'm not going to last, then let's enjoy the moment. Let's do what needs to be done now and enjoy the benefits of it now. If people have the idea, oh, well, I can lollygag for this life and the next one, and eventually I'll take up some Dhamma, and eventually I'll be happy, because who knows, I've got so many lives to live. And they wind up still stuck in suffering because of their belief in past and future lives. So this is the one thing that this is called. Actually, it's got two labels to it. One label is called personality view, and the other label is called a doctrine of personality. Now, the doctrine of personality is that which is taught by a religion. So Christianity has a doctrine about the soul, that the Hindus have doctrines about the soul, different than the Christians. But the intention of this doctrine is to preserve the soul past the point of death. Same thing with Hindus, almost all of the religions. That in fact, from what I've gathered, Taoism was very, very close, very similar to Buddhism so many centuries ago. But now modern Taoism in China is just another belief system that's associated a whole lot with funerals and death, because they're wanting to have this magic. So, in fact, if you think about it like that, the original magic, the first magic, is me. I. I am. That's the first magical system that we have. And that does not fit with the actual reality on the outside. That reality world only exists as a mental world. Doesn't exist in the real reality. Gods exist, but they exist in the minds of men and women. Gods don't exist outside of the mind, but boy, do they exist, because gods exist in millions of minds. So there's a whole lot of God out there, but it's still all within a human mind. On the outside of the senses, no God. On the outside of the senses, no self. Just what is, just what's happening. So we have this doctrine of the self that's given to us by a religion, but then we also have our own ignorance because we believe in ourselves, because we've already heard all of this stuff from all of the religions, and so we kind of manufacture our own little doctrine of a self and think this is who I am. But the real teaching of the Buddha is no, you're not who you think you are, because by the time you think you are, you've already changed now. Everything is constantly changing. There was a French philosopher, his name Descartes. Descartes. Descartes is his French name. And people who read English books call him Descartes because that's the way that it looks in print. But Descartes, he had the idea, he said, I think, therefore I am. Have you heard that?
Yeah, it's also very famous in China.
All right. Well, it's wrong. I think, therefore I am is wrong. Here's the correct way of saying it. I think, therefore I think I am. You get it? The thought does
Yeah,
not create an I. It's the thought of an I that creates the I. That's amazing, isn't it? It's not that the thought creates the I, or that thought proves that the I exists. Rather, the I is created by the thought of the I. That's all we are. It's just a thought, I am. But the reality is, oh no. Now, there's a real reason underlying that. There is some really, really strong old programming that we have coming out of our DNA. The collective DNA that makes us humans has the same instinct that all other animals have. Dogs have it, pigs have it, all of the mammals, but so do chickens, ducks, snakes. Everything that's alive has a quality that it wants to stay alive. If a rabbit is in the woods and gets his foot caught in a trap, that rabbit will eat his paw off to get free rather than accept death. All right? So there's a strong instinctual nature within each one of us that wants to keep us alive. This is what's called a self-preservation instinct. And that self-preservation instinct is merely just an instinct, it's just a process, but ignorant human beings being told this doctrine of a self begin to get confused about who am I? And we tend to think I am a kind of a permanent thing, to where, oh no, I think, therefore I think I am, means the I only comes up when we have the thought, so it's a brand new I every time. But we make the mistake that it's the same old I coming back over and over and over again, to where it's a new one every time. This is the true meaning of the word rebirth, that this I is reborn with a thought every so often. This is the teaching of the Buddha. the teaching of rebirth and reincarnation and having lives last one after another, not the teaching of the Buddha. She's saying I'm bleeding from the razor. Did you get me a new razor? You
Yeah, evening echo.
okay? Thank you, Tam. This is Coiby. He is in China.
Oh, really? Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. So, according to the Buddha's path, and in many, many different sutras and things point this out, basically is that to proceed on the path of the Buddha, we have to get over the idea that I exist over a long period of time and begin to understand that the nature of the self is only momentary. One example that we can use here is with Christians versus atheists. In America, I don't know if this means very much to you. Maybe it does in China, but in America, you have a growing, large group of people of atheists who are coming out of Christianity. And yet, from the Buddha's perspective, there is very, very little difference between Christians and atheists. That about the only thing that they argue over is whether God exists or not. That's what they're mainly complaining about. Because the moral standards that the atheists have, they already got it out of the Christian culture. And then, in fact, atheists wind up being higher moral standards than the Christians themselves because the Christians have an easy out. All they have to do is just get forgiveness, and then they can go off and do any old bad thing they want to again. But this point about atheists and Christians being the same is that the Christians believe that after they die, the soul will continue. And the atheists say, no, on the breakup of the body, the individual self will be extinguished. So they think that the soul or the self exists up until the time of death. Christians think, oh no, it's even longer than that. But Buddhists say, oh no, there it goes again. Up, up, down, very quick, doesn't last a lifetime. That in fact the Buddha was accused of teaching that kind of nihilism, or that the existing self died at the breakup of the body. And he says, no, I don't teach that. I don't teach that at all. What I teach is suffering and no suffering. So, this is an important quality, and we've recognized it already by physical reality. Modern physics proves this whole idea of a self that has a soul that's identifiable and trackable, and all of that doesn't fit with our reality. The second thing that we have to work with is that the way that I'm describing it to you is so that you can have an intellectual understanding based upon the fact of the reality of the situation. Plus, I bring in number 3, my teacher, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. This is his teachings also. And that I've got a lineage and that we go back. And then not only that, but it goes all the way back to the Buddha himself. And so that you can see by reading the sutras, yes, that's right. Even though all of this rebirth, reincarnation stuff has gotten mixed in with the sutras, the real teaching of the Buddha has to do with anatta. There is no self except this thought of a self that keeps coming up. So this is the real teaching of the Buddha, and that's the secret teaching that's inside of the religion. Because most of the people who call themselves Buddhists, they still think that there's a self out there and that things will go from life to life. But if you understand it like this, the way that I'm teaching it now, that actually puts that immediate need. Okay, I've got to do something. By doing that and by coming to understand this for yourself and going deep into the Dhamma, you now fulfill the fifth item, which makes them all together, because now your new understanding of reality and your new understanding of the way that the mind works fits correctly with the actual reality that we live in. And it conforms to the teachings of the Buddha. And it conforms to the teachings of the masters. And it conforms to your good friend, the fat Buddha here, Dhammarato. And everything is in sync. And when we do that, that doubt about who I am kind of just drifts away, and we no longer have any doubt about it, because we've got all of the evidence from every different angle that points to that there is no self except that which we manufacture, and that self then is that which becomes actually quite painful. That in fact it's that manufactured self that really doesn't exist. We manufacture it for the sole purpose of containing the suffering. If there was no self, there's nothing to suffer. So now we begin to understand what the real path is now that we understand that there is this delusion about who I am, then we have to go down and sort of repair the programming down at that basic instinctual level so that we can begin to live reality without living it instinctually. And the best way to do that is always in the here now, because if we're living instinctually, we're naturally living off in the past. So modern China is not a dangerous place. Modern United States is not a dangerous place, and yet in China, many people are afraid of all kinds of things. In America, there is a lot more fear. A lot of people in the United States are quite fearful. The old whites are afraid of all of the other races coming in. The blacks are afraid of the police. The Republicans are afraid the Democrats are going to take over. The Democrats are afraid the Republicans are destroying the country. And here we go, one group after another. Everybody's at war with everybody else, and no one is happy. Because why? Because they're letting these ignorant feelings, these tribal feelings, these deep-seated feelings and beliefs and attitudes that come out of our DNA to run their lives. In other words, we're acting like reptiles. We're acting like lizards. We don't live our lives as if we were actually human. But the human part of the brain is actually up front. The reptilian brain that does all of the feelings and all of this weird stuff that we've been talking about is actually in the back anterior cortex. And so this is why breath comes in now. Because breath is one of the things that if we start thinking about it consciously, it no longer is being controlled by the automatic pilot in the old reptilian brain, but it begins to light up. MARs begin to light up the front portion of the brain. We actually literally wake up the human part of the brain when we're watching the breath. Isn't that strange? Isn't that interesting? Now, the Buddha may have not known about the MRIs and waking up the frontal part of the brain, but he still had all the language right. Anapanasati, to wake up the mind. So in this regard, we're saying that the real wake-up is to come out of the old reptilian programming that we were born with and bring it to the frontal cortex so that we can live a happy life that is determined. But that's going to take some skill. We're going to have to develop that frontal cortex to become in charge. The reptilian brain is actually a kind of a loser, that we're fearful, we feel needy, we actually put ourselves in the position of victims. that every child is born a victim, incapable of taking care of himself. And so we become victims to the house, to our family. And so we need their help. We need their support. And so we have to sort of toe the line or learn the rules or do what we're told. And in that regard, we start to maintain this victim's position that came naturally with the territory of this part of the reptilian mind. And so every time that you remember to take a deep breath, every time that you bring the mind back to the breath and away from this old garbage in the back, that's actually a waking up. We're actually waking up the frontal cortex of the mind, lighting it up. And by taking deep breaths, we're actually pumping more oxygen through the blood so that we're oxygenating the brain, making it more alert, more alive. And not only that, but many of the chemicals that have been put into the body haphazardly by the lizard brain are now, because we're breathing more deeply, those fine little particles, the reminiscence of amino acids, adrenaline, cortisone gets broken down, and as we're breathing out, that stuff is removed from the body. So this whole idea of anapanasati is a major, major factor in beginning to change the way the mind operates, to come out of the old reptilian brain, the brain of religion, the brain of the Buddhist religion, and come into the reality of the here now, in this present moment. And so that's basically the whole process that needs to be done. But the Buddha has quite a lot of milestones along the path. Now, one of the dangers of knowing these milestones too far in advance is that we start judging ourselves against these future milestones. But if we understand the milestones correctly, we can begin to see them, oh, that's a reachable goal. Or now I understand it because now I'm at that mile marker. Now I understand what it actually means. So this is the reason that the Buddha left these mile markers or these road signs or whatever posted along the way, and he left quite a lot of them. And so we'll begin to talk about what those are, but I've already listed 3 of them for you. The first 3 is personality view, doubt about what is actually the path and who I am, and then this third one is sila bhatta paramasa, or our attachments to the way things should be. Because if things are not the way they should be, then that's a job to do. But if we don't have any beliefs about how things should be, then the way things are should be good enough. And my job is only now is to see how things actually are. That's the work to do. Come back to the present moment is really all that needs to be done. But we need to do it over and over and over and over again because we've been letting this reptilian brain run things for ever so many years now. And we have to keep taking control away from that reptilian mind and put it into the frontal cortex where we can develop wisdom. So we'll leave things at this point, but I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. I'm pretty sure you've got a couple.
Yeah, thank you for teaching. I could understand your teachings intellectually. For example, I also read some material on how they argue that the 5 aggregates are not a self. And if I follow the argument, the conclusion I draw is that those things I cannot call them self.
Exactly. There is no self there. The body, no self. The feelings, no self. Consciousness, no self. Perception, no self. And our memory systems, what's called sankharas, no self there. That's the beauty of it is that in fact, you didn't even know it, but I'd already been talking about the five aggregates for half the day. Yes, the five aggregates, there is no self there. There's no self in the body. There is no self in feelings. Reason that we know that there's no self in the body, because you can't change how high you are. You can't grow to double your size. You can't make your body 75 years old today and 9 years old tomorrow. If it was really your body, if there was really a self there, then you would have it under control. But you don't. There's no control over the body. Then, in fact, most people, they can't even control their breathing until they start to practice. So obviously, the body is not self. It's going to do whatever it pleases to do. It'll get sick on its own. Now, there are conditioners. The mind conditions the feelings, and the feelings will condition the body, but still there's no feeling or there's no self there. It's just all process. The consciousness that we were talking about, that's one of the five aggregates. No self. Just a transaction between the light waves and hitting the eye and the ability to see. That's all there is. There's no self in there. The same is true then for all of our feelings. So the five aggregates, there is no self.
Yeah, but the interesting is that, for example, if I observe myself, I think most of the day, my mind tell me that there was eye behind my eyes, and the focal point is just behind my eye. Except for sometimes, for example, I just wake up from sleep, then I will see there's a self. It arises gradually. Then the mind think this self stay stable through the time, except when you're absorbed in doing something, you're fully immersed in something, then this self will go. When you're finished, then this self pops out again. But
It can.
most of the time, yeah.
Doesn't have to, but it does often. It doesn't pop, by the way. It's a condition. It's a conditioned thing. It arises because of conditions. If you say pop the way that you did, you're speaking magically now. That's back to the Buddhist religion. Things just pop up. No, they don't pop up. They were caused. Everything like that. But I understand what you mean when you're saying pop. You're not actually just saying that it's magic, that the eye pops up because of the conditions that it's in. And we're going to talk about that. But the important part right now is for you to understand there is no self in the aggregates. Not there. Not only that, but the Sankara, the memory system, is not very good. It's faulty. Here's an example of that. You probably got a movie or two on your computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you remember in your mind every part about one of those movies, frame by frame, everything? You remember every pixel, you remember every word, you remember every street sign, you remember everything? No, you don't. Cannot be done. Your computer has a much better memory system than you do, thank you very much. Human memory is not very good. And so one of the problems that we have is that we trust our memories. We think that we know when we know something, where in fact there's two possibilities. One, the thing that we thought we knew has changed, and the other one is that what we saw was real, but by the time it got into memory and then get replayed, it's junk. Back in the really, really old days when I was quite young man, we were dealing with trying to get tape drives working good, even with audio, because in the really old days there was a lot of hiss that came naturally on the tape itself. And so what you heard in reality and then what you heard as a recording was not the same. And so for many years, the entire industry was trying to take the hiss out of music. All right? So that's the whole thing then is that as we're recording things inside the mind, we're putting our own bias or our own hiss in there. So we didn't see it when we actually saw it. We only, uh, our consciousness was not perfect. Our perception was not perfect. The old memories were not perfect, giving rise to a new thing that's now stored in memory, not perfect. And then when we remember it, it's still not perfect. So every level of it goes down worse and worse and worse. Now, if it were my memory, I'd have a good memory. In fact, I think I do until I realize, oh no, I don't. It's not good. It's not all of what it was cracked up to be. When I was a young man, I had a perfect memory. That was because I was delusional. That's the delusion, is thinking that our memories are good. So you're right. None of the five aggregates are a self because none of them can be controlled. All of them operate automatically. About the best thing that we can do is see them for what they are. And by seeing them for what they are, we can begin to control them just a little bit by saying turning them on and off when we like. But the entire process is not me. I don't have control over it. These five aggregates, they just come with the territory, and the territory is not me. So you're right. That's exactly the teaching for the day. You are not the five aggregates. You were in, and if you're not the five aggregates, what the heck can you be? Other than a thought. I think, therefore I think I am. That's where the I comes from. And so we'll talk about that. Basically, what we've done then is we've kind of done half of Paticca Samuppada today. And so later we'll do the other half of the Paticca Samuppada in order to see in detail, well, where does this self actually come from? Because we recognize at this level of all of the components of the mind, there's no self there. Only by understanding there is no self can you begin to really get good benefits out of a meditation practice. And at the same time, the meditation practice and this new knowledge begins to unify the mind so that you begin to be not scattered. One of the ways of scattering is with doubt. Doubt about this, doubt about that, and so we're not unified, we're not whole. But also if we begin to practice and understand that there is no self, but that there is this process, and we begin to understand the process, then that understanding of the process then begins to unify the mind. Many of the really old masters, those who've been in the Dhamma a long, long time, will say the Buddha didn't teach much. He only taught just a little bit. But the new students, when they see it, they say, wow, how much Buddhism is there? There's, 4 noble truths and 16 steps of anapanasati and 4 foundation of mindfulness and 5 aggregates and 12 steps of paticca samuppada and the Eightfold Noble Path and 36 modes of feeling based on the 6 aggregates or the 6 sense-based give us 108. And you probably wondered where that 108 comes from. It comes from 36 times 6. And where does the 36 come from? It comes from 6 times 6. With 6 senses and 3 feelings and ignorance and not ignorance and the 5 and the 6 sense base and all of that winds up being 108. You can do the math. You know how to do that. But that's for the beginner. To see all of this numerical diversity, But really what we can do is then we can, you probably know this. In the West, we have an idea or a concept called a Chinese puzzle. That's normally a wooden box that you can see that there's little cubes in there of all different shapes, or not shapes, but different colors and textures of wood. But that this box will come apart so that these things are interconnected and they wind up being 5, 10, or 20 pieces, and that you have to then take all of these pieces and put it back into the box correctly. That is a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, except this is a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle made of wood. Have you ever seen one of these?
I didn't. I can't recall any such thing.
Well, we'll just have to tell the Americans to stop calling it a Chinese puzzle if the Chinese don't know about it. So that's the bit about the way that the Buddha Dhamma is, that we have to give you all of the pieces of the puzzle.
Oh, I know. Maybe it's called 七窍板 in Chinese. Yeah, maybe. Okay.
So you do know the Chinese puzzle. Okay, well, I won't go tell America they've got to change the name. All right. So what we can do is we can give you all the pieces of the puzzle and tell you that these pieces fit together. But it'll have to be you to fit them together. And once you do, you'll say, yes, that's exactly right. It's just one thing. It's this puzzle. But when I first looked at it, it looked like all of these various little pieces that I had to memorize and learn and whatnot. No, they were just part of the puzzle that comes together. And so that's the way that we want to understand it is that putting the puzzle together has a lot of milestones, and we'll talk about those. But the important thing is that you combine this with practice in the sense of the here now. That meditation is often understood wrongly by people in the West to be a contemplation meditation in the sense of, oh, well, I'm going to spend 30 minutes in meditation and I'm going to think about the Four Noble Truths, or I'm going to think about the Eightfold Noble Path. No, what we want to do is spend our time in the present moment recognizing the Four Noble Truths. In this present moment, to recognize the third noble truth in the sense of, oh, this is a really nice nibbana moment, and we'll talk more about that, but it always has to do with what's happening right here, right now. This is the entire practice of the Buddha, and that you can recognize that if that's the entire practice, then belief in rebirth and reincarnation is really off track. That's taken us way off in the opposite direction, far into the future and far into the past. And what we want to do is forget about the past and the future and come just to see what's happening right here, right now. And so that's the way that we start to practice, to recognize, okay, I can see the 5 aggregates right here, right now. Here's the body, here's the feelings, here's the consciousness. Start to play with consciousness, understand what it is, begin to understand perception in the sense of perception is the little tasks that we do to understand what it is that we receive from the senses. An example of that is that you, I've got 2 of them. One is a crawling ant. That as soon as you recognize that the ant is crawling, you can feel the crawl, but you want to look, you want to identify it, you want to see what it is. All right? That's the perception quality of once we feel the feeling, we want to identify it. We want to see what that is. Okay? Now I'll tell you the other one. I was sitting here where I'm sitting with my arm on this banister here on the porch, and the cat jumped out of the tree over here. You see, I've got a tree, and the cat climbed up the tree and jumped off the tree right onto my arm. And I was not aware that the cat was in the tree, so it was kind of a big surprise to have a big, healthy cat jumping and landing on my arm. But I recognized that there was almost no startle reaction, that I saw immediately that it was just a cat. There was no reason to go crazy, but that was that instant of perception between the time the cat landed and figuring out that it was the cat that had landed. That time between those two is perception. It's the figuring out what's going on in the real world. And during that time of figuring out what's going on in the real world, we're not operating consciously. The consciousness has to be there in order to feed data to this perception that tries to figure out what's going on. Okay, so you can play with these aggregates now. You can begin to understand perception. You can understand that you pulled something out of memory. And so this is the way that we practice, is not looking at the 5 aggregates as something to memorize or to understand intellectually so that you can take an exam for school. That's not what it is. It's experiential. You got to see it right now. You got to understand, because you can see what you mean by perception, that you can actually perceive it. That's why we work with the 5 aggregates. And the most important quality of the 5 aggregates, no self in there anywhere.
Yeah, I can understand that. But right now, I can't dissect my sensitive experience into 5 aggregates. My mind still tells me that these things happen very smoothly, so I cannot divide the experience into different parts.
Keep watching, keep noting, keep watching, keep investigating.
Okay.
That's the way to do it, is to keep watching, keep noting, but always be in the here now. That whenever you get into the mind and thinking about the past or the future, even if it's just thinking about aggregates, always we want to use the breath, to keep coming back to the breath and use that as an anchor to be here now. Because everything that we're going to do in the Buddha Dhamma is going to be done right here in the here now.
Okay. So last week you taught me a trick, to set a timer to make a sound randomly. So should I report to you now?
Yes, continue on with that. We'll talk about that next time. That's actually deeper into the practice. I wanted today to put this philosophical base under it about no self, because I'd already talked to you and promised you about doing the 5 aggregates. And you caught me. Here I am. I deliver a whole sermon on the 5 aggregates and even failed to mention that, oh, and by the way, we're talking about the 5 aggregates, but you caught me. So that's the philosophical foundation, is that we have to be in the here now by understanding there is no deep past. There is no far future. There is only this moment. And by doing that, then we can concentrate on the here now and see these bodily parts, these constituencies, these factors of, let us say, items that are dependent. For instance, perception is dependent upon consciousness. Perception is also dependent upon sankhara. And the outcome of perception is thought. Okay? And so feelings are based in the body, but they're also mental feelings. And so the mind conditions feelings. Feelings condition the mind. Feelings condition the body. the body conditions the feelings. And so everything is interrelated that way. Part of your job is to see how that does in the here now, to begin to see how your body is affected by feelings, to see how feelings are affected by mind, that you can gladden the mind, you can sharpen the mind, you can say, yeehaw, I can see that now. I can come and be here now, and I can be pleased and happy because I remember to come and be here now. So every time that alarm goes off, even at a random one, you can say, all right, now's the time to come out of the past. Now's the time to come out of the future. Now is the time to come and be here now and see what's happening right now. Okay?
Yeah, I can do
Yeah.
that.
You can do that, all right. Okay. Well, I very much enjoyed talking to you. I hope to see you soon. Again, maybe a week or half a week, something like that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. So thank you.
Okay. See you. Bye
See
bye.
you. Bye bye.